everybody. It's Justin Berg with Purple Care. I'm the host of Lawn Therapy. Today I've got with me Paul Winski from Texas AgriLife Extension. Very excited to hear you speak about a lot of the stuff that we're going to go over today as far as what you guys are doing over there and the education system that you guys are providing through an A&M and for the consumers. Pronounce your last name for me, Paul.
Just Winski.
Winski?
Easy Polish name.
Good
Win and ski. That's it.
Give me some of your credentials. What is, as far as your, I don't know if you have any add-ons after your name as far as,
So I got a bachelor's in ornamental horticulture, which was a focus more on floriculture, so greenhouse production. That was at Delaware Valley University in Doylestown, PA, right, just outside of Philly. And then I went and got my master's at University of Connecticut in plant science. And that focus was on Alstroemeria breeding and tissue culture.
Sure. Did you kind of have the basketball teams they had back
They
then?
were just starting
too?
They were just coming on. So, yeah.
The Huskies, right?
Yep. So they were just coming on. I think the year before, I was there from 87 till 90. And I think in 89 is when they made it to the end. They got into the NIT, and I think they won it in 89 or something like that. So that we were 88. So
did you like Hartford?
Well, we were in Stores. We weren't in Hartford. So it's about a half hour, 40 minutes from Hartford.
Okay, yeah.
But Stores was, we used to call it Snores. If the school wasn't there, it would have been, just a little town. But the interesting thing was we stopped there this past summer. I hadn't been back there since we left maybe. So that was in 90. And it's just amazing how the campus has grown and how much, money's gone into it, which is good. I mean, it's always good to see that.
I literally think your boys and girls basketball team had a lot to do with that money.
Yeah.
Because they kept on making it to the Final Four, both of them.
Yeah.
And they produced some NFL, or not NFL, but NBA players on both sides.
Yep.
So.
And then there was a year or two where they did have a good football team. Mm-hmm. And so, but then all of a sudden they dropped off pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just amazing because, my wife was there and she's like, we used to be able to walk right through here. And I said, I said, now there's buildings and all, but it's good to see that it's grown.
And you get your, master's degree in horticulture, right?
Plant science.
Plant science, okay.
And so it was actually that my thesis was in tissue culture with petunia, but I was hired on. So I was working full time on a project that was grant funded. And it was to develop U.S. varieties of Alstroemeria for the cut flower market, for the potted plant market. And so it was working out a lot of those protocols with regard to tissue culture, embryo recovery, conventional breeding, things like that. So it was a lot of fun, and it led into a job for me to go out to California and work for a cut flower grower out there and basically do the same thing. I was running the lab and heading the.
So you actually did the lab work on these plants.
Yeah, and also the breeding program on it.
So you're creating different varieties.
Correct. So the story behind it is if you want to grow, and I don't know. Gosh, it's been 30 some years now, so I don't know if it has changed or not. But so all of the varieties that have been developed up until then were all Dutch varieties.
Okay.
And so. And a lot of those.
Why the Dutch? Why were the Dutch so big into flowers? I mean, just because.
Have you ever been to Holland?
No, that is on my. I will, but no, I've not.
Okay, so if you ever go there, it's just amazing. Cut flower production, potted plant production, nursery production. They're just. I always sort of say the way that the Japanese are to electronics.
Yeah.
The Dutch are to the green industry.
Okay.
Efficiencies, varieties, just really impressive. So a lot of the varieties, that breeding was all through mutation work. So through irradiation and things like that. And so the flowers are naturally sterile, so you can't pollinate them.
Sure.
And so if you're a cut flower grower back then, if you were a cut flower grower in the U.S., you would pay a price for the plants.
Sure.
You'd bring them in, set them out, grow them out. And then you had to pay basically a rental fee every year on those plants, and you couldn't propagate them. So if you bought in 1,000 plants of one variety, they would come out on a rate, once a year or so, and just check to make sure that you still had 1,000 plants, that you weren't propagating them on your own.
Sure.
And you can propagate them from division quite easily, but
right.
And then after about, depending on the variety, 3 to 5 years, it was like, all right, you've got to take it out of production and you got to buy new plants from us. And so the thought was, if we can come up with our own U.S. varieties, that would be cut out and it be, much more economically feasible for a grower to grow the Alstroemeria as a cut flower. And so through the work that I did at UConn and there and at out in California, we found that you can use those flowers. Don't use the initial flower, but so Alstroemeria will put out secondary, tertiary flowers and things like that. And it seems like if you pollinate them and then go in and recover the embryos and plate them out, they'll germinate.
Okay.
And then we can sort of circumvent that. If we leave them on there, there's good chance that they're not going to set seed and they're just going to shrivel up and die off.
Sure.
So doing this embryo recovery was a step around that. So it was a way of beating it. And so we had varieties coming. We were working on cut flower varieties. We were working on potted varieties. And then unfortunately, the guy, and it was a great place. It was in North County, right on the coast. You could turn around and, see the ocean every day. So it was one of the, but he sold the land to a developer.
Yeah.
And so just as I think I had about 4 years into the program, and he just decided to sell, and everything just went away. And it was frustrating.
Yeah,
I was young. It was, you're trying to get your career up and going.
Right.
But you learned a lot from it. And so looking back, it's just one of those, it was a bump in the road, and you deal with it from there. So
How many people know that plants have embryos? I mean, seriously, that's a small population of people that even think about it that way.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting. You got down to that kind of science
Yeah.
that you were.
Yeah. So it was really pretty cool because, and we knew it was, so many days after pollination, we could go in, harvest them, plate them out. We'd get germination and then grow those out and see what the variations and the differences were. So
That sounds like it must have been gratifying, though. Like it must have been like really gratifying work, what you're doing.
It was a lot of fun. It was one of those, you'd have all these, springtime was always great because the first flowers are coming and everybody's getting excited. And then people would come in and say, well, do you have this color? Or do you have, they always ask for something you didn't have.
Right.
And it's just one of those things that's not yet. We're working on it. We've got a source. We can get pollen from this one, and this is a cross we're going to try. So, or there was a species that had fragrance. And so how do you get that fragrance in them? Because cut flower wise, they were great. They would last for about 14 days as a cut flower. So they had a good vase life.
Yeah.
Great colors. Some of them had stripes. We were starting to find varieties where they didn't have the stripes or the flecking on them. And so we had a lot of cool things that were coming along. And then all of a sudden the carpet was pulled out from under you. So, that's life. You move on and move on to the next thing. So
what's the plant that's the cut flower? It's super stargazers. Aren't those super fragrant?
Lilies. Yeah.
Man, they're fragrant. I think they smell awesome.
Yeah. So, some folks think it's too overpowering.
My wife would be one of those. I brought them home, I think once, maybe twice, and that was it. They made her feel sick actually.
Yeah. They are pretty heavy,
Yeah, I love them. I think they smell great.
Yeah.
I believe they use that same plant in some of the pest control as well. Is it not? Isn't it strong enough?
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, because it's strong enough.
Because they're starting to find these secondary metabolites and alkaloids and things like that from other plants that are able to act as a deterrent to certain pests.
Sure. So you again undergrad horticulture, and then you get your master's degree in plant sciences.
Right.
Go to California. Go to California. Work on new varieties, right? And literally, you were, by the way, plant names. I saw a rose. It was called Arbutus Blanford. And I mean, that was the name of the rose, which means it. So how do you, I mean, you were, literally making maybe your own new varieties, or how do names of, I mean, how do you get to name plants? How do you get to name flowers?
That's a great question, because and there's a lot of debate about, so when I moved to Texas, I took a position with Heinz Nurseries as a new product development coordinator. And so there we were looking for, new varieties that we could patent,
Sure.
line extension, you name it. And the product mix there was broad. We had color, we had flowering tropicals, shrubs, ground covers, everything. So, but, naming those, especially if it's something that's patentable, in the past, people would use a good, a name, and that was the cultivar name. So, Nandina, Bay Breeze, was one that was patented through Heinz. And so that was one that everybody knew was a great plant, performed extremely well.
Do you guys make the firepower or no?
I don't know. I can't remember.
It's probably my favorite Nandina.
I don't know.
I love that Nandina.
But so what has happened since then is, these plant patents last for 20 years.
Right.
And so, as soon as you apply is when really the clock starts ticking on that. Not when they say it's issued. All right. So, and that could be 2 years after the fact.
Right.
So, but so what companies started to realize was they were losing that name recognition on some of these varieties because they were coming off patent. And so what they started to do was come up with these, and as people would say, nonsensical names for the cultivar.
Right.
And then what they were doing was trademarking the name that they were going to call the plant.
Henry Dulberg.
Right. Well, Henry Dole. So, do you know the story behind Henry Dole?
Talk to me.
All right. Well, let's
finish this one first. Yeah.
So, so what would happen was, so now you'll see like a nonsensical cultivar name, but then you'll see a trademark name that it's referred to.
Give me an example of that.
And lavender twist, redbud. Okay.
All right.
So the weeping one, the cultivar name is Covey, Covey, but the trademark name is lavender twist.
Right.
All right. So Covey is but lavender twist has
right.
Catches your attention. So by the company trademarking that name, when it comes off patent, once it comes off patent, it's just like with pharmaceuticals. Anybody can start to grow it. Right. They don't have to pay a royalty on it anymore or anything like that. But if I start to grow it and you own the trademark on it, I can only grow it and sell it as Covey. I can't use the lavender twist unless I ask you for the rights to it. And then you're going to say, well, yeah, you can use it, but I want X,
Right.
I want to, it's almost like I want another royalty just because you're using that name. So you could be growing Covey, selling it with the label on it, but then the name recognition may not be there.
Right.
And so people are going to say, well, I want lavender twist. And if the garden center doesn't know the difference, well, this is really the same plant. It just, they're not allowed to use the trademark name.
Right.
That's why that whole thing just really took off. And I would say that's in the past 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Where we started to do that. And it makes sense because it protects them.
It should. Why? Yeah. If you spend all that time, people don't understand the time and energy it goes into. I thought some of the names I saw on some of these roses, these are roses that are probably more like 50 and 60 years old, maybe 100 years old. I mean, because a lot of those roses came out of England. Yeah. And the names were...
Yeah, and so some of those names may have just been named after someone in the family.
Yeah, it was...
it's things like that.
Arbutus Blanford.
Yeah. So it was probably somebody's name, or it may have been somebody's, could have been their school teacher or something like that.
Yeah, could have been.
Everybody pulls inspiration.
Their lover, you never know.
They pull inspiration from anywhere, so...
I found it interesting.
That's how they do it.
Yeah.
So
Henry Dulberg.
Henry Dulberg. So the story behind that is that was a found plant. So I don't know if you've ever
Really?
met. Yeah. So if you've ever met Greg Grant, great plantsman,
I don't.
he is a horticulture agent with AgriLife Extension. He's in the Tyler area, and he like myself. He's been in the industry, finding new plants and working with
Sure.
other companies. So he was out on a plant collecting tour or so. They were out West Texas. And one place to if you see plants that are thriving in old cemeteries, there's a good chance that plant's going to be a hardy plant.
Sure.
And so they stopped at this cemetery. They're walking around, and they found this salvia, and it was thriving. And there was, there's no, you could tell there's no upkeep, no, not,
Please don't
nothing's
tell
been
me
done
that
there.
it was a grave.
And so they tried to find out, key it out. They tried to match it up with a variety name and think they couldn't. And so
They went with the headstone?
it was next to Mr. Henry Dahlberg's headstone. So
Well, wait a minute. There's the wife though.
yes.
Yes.
And it was the same thing. Her grave was next to his. There was a white form of it that was
darn,
growing
that's
and
really
thriving. So when I give talks to master gardeners, I do a lot of plant, landscape plant ID and things like that for them.
Yeah.
I said sometimes the stories behind the plants are more interesting than
Agreed.
the plants themselves. The plants are great. They thrive
Yeah.
nonstop in the heat. Loads of flowers, beneficials, bring in the beneficial insects and stuff like that. But just that, for someone to say, this is an interesting plant, and then all of a sudden people are growing it like crazy. It's a Texas superstar.
It's one of my favorites.
And then,
Henry Dahlberg self.
yeah.
I love that plant.
So
I own several of them.
yeah.
I love it. It's a great
So
plant.
the stories behind them are always really pretty cool when you dig into it. And Dr. Alan Armitage, he's got a book about that, about some of the names, how some of these varieties were named and who the person is that they named it after.
That's
and
pretty
stuff like
cool.
that. So there's a lot of cool things about the industry.
Very good. So what, leaving California, how did you wind up planning Texas? How'd you get back to Texas? How'd you get to here?
So we left California. We wanted to get back at least to the East Coast. Family was up in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
So we're actually in Charleston, South Carolina for a few years.
Beautiful.
Worked at, and that was a step away from the plant world. And I worked at the Hollings Cancer Center.
Okay.
I had a lot of
Lab work?
tissue culture work.
Yeah.
There were friends of ours. He was starting up a lab. He was a researcher. Melanoma was his specialty. And so he said, hey, you know in vitro work, lab work. He says, I need someone to get things going. Mammalian cell work is not a lot different than what you've already been doing. Are you interested? So I said, sure, let's go for it. And so we went. So I learned a little bit more on the molecular side, running gels, DNA isolation, all that cool stuff. But man, it was a big difference. I didn't realize how much I missed not working outdoors because you were in the lab the whole time. And it was sobering, to say the least, because, when you're breeding and you have these varieties that are lousy, you just kick over the pot and you throw it away.
Right.
It goes in the compost heap. But there were patients coming in that at the time were younger than me that, it's, stage 3, stage 4 melanoma and things like that. And so, it's like, I know this is really important stuff, but it's tough, and I always asked him, how are you able to, deliver that information, to a patient? And he says, as if it's an older patient, it's not as bad because I know they've had a chance to live, their life. And
Sure.
He says, but when it's a younger person, he says, I've always got to sort of build myself up because it's tough. And he says, even after I tell them, he says, that's never a good day. He says, it's never a good day when you have to tell someone
Sure.
you've got cancer. But when you tell someone that's younger, that may not see, may not be around in the next 2 to 3 years or so, it's tough. So that's why, he says, but the work we do is hopefully going to get them more time. and I'm sure that has changed because that was back in the mid '90s. So this is it's been a while.
Yeah.
And so we went from there and went to Savannah, Georgia. Then
again, beautiful. I love both those
yeah,
towns, Charleston and Savannah.
And actually, I was working for a paper company, and I was doing pine and hardwood propagation research and some tree improvement work. So I was back in the green side of things, in the greenhouse, outdoors.
Trying to grow different varieties of pine? Or?
Actually, it was more developing clonal varieties. So they had their breeding program, and there were varieties that we wanted to, we knew were good producers. And so there were systems there where what we called the hedge system, where we sort of grew them into hedges. We would get nice cuttings off of them for pine and then root them. And pine is not normally, propagated that way.
Right.
Did some work with sweet gum and some other things like that. So that was interesting. Things were going well there, but then again, we were bought out by another company. And I had a job, but I knew things weren't going to be the same. And so that was mid to late '90s. And there was a position for new products with Heinz. And it was one of those, I saw it, this is before the internet, or the internet was probably just starting. But
1991. Yeah. That's what's started.
And so it was, it was an ad in one of the trade magazines. And I sent a resume in and offered me, when it came out, interviewed, offered me the job. And then we had to figure out, do we really want to move? We had young kids. We had just moved into a new house. And it was like, but the school system wasn't that great in Savannah, and we were in Savannah. And so we said, hey, let's roll the dice. And so we moved out here in '99, and we've been here ever since. So
well, I'm glad you made it to Texas. Help us out. What's your you said you're in pines. I don't know what's your favorite pine tree for Texas? If I can have for actually North Texas. I mean, because you guys in Houston can grow a whole different variety down there, a lot better than we can. But for North Texas, do you have a favorite pine by chance, or that works up here?
The main one that we worked on, the species was loblolly pine.
That's the one I recommend. Yeah, when people ask me, because there's certain people that say, "Oh, well, I really want a pine tree," I'm like, they do okay here, but I said the only one I really recommend is that loblolly, and that's it. Otherwise, they're like, well, what about this? I'm like, you can try it.
There's you guys are, couple. You what zone? I know it's just been are you 6 up here?
No,
7.
We're 7. We're 7, 8. Yeah.
Okay.
So
because I know you can probably get by with some of the other more ornamental pines that have much nicer textures and things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more slow growing, but I know where I'm at down in Houston. It's basically you buy a house. You're either going to get a loblolly pine or you're going to get a live oak.
Yeah.
In the front yard if it's a new development. So,
right. We don't see as many pines here as you do, especially East Texas and South.
Right.
You'll get a lot more of them, but definitely a lot of live oaks. Red oaks are real big here. Your just general post oak are natural. Those things are right behind you outside. They're just naturally growing everywhere. But and I'm not a big fan of maples here, like there are in the Northeast, so like where you and I used to live up. Maples were very common and great trees, phenomenal shade trees, but kicked off a lot of shade. But they just, I guess once, that's one thing I've noticed is that like you can have hydrangeas in Texas, but they don't look like the hydrangeas I had in Boston. They don't look like the ones you had in Pennsylvania.
And part of it is, I think it's just that the overall, it's the climate. The soils probably have something to do with it, but it's that climate. Our nights don't cool down enough for them.
No, they don't.
And so if you don't have them in shade, and they're going to need that shade, they're just not going to do it. And so if I go back and we visit family and we're there in July and we still see hydrangeas blooming, it's just like ours are just
we can't go back. Once you've seen that, like people go, oh, look at my hydrangeas, they're beautiful. I'm like,
yeah, they look good for Texas, but
I mean, once you've seen those humongous heads, and
Yeah.
they last a long
Yeah.
time. Like the ones here, they don't last long. They don't have the giant heads.
Yeah.
The coloration isn't quite right. And up north, it's just it's definitely the soil. I mean, granted, it's the temperature as well, but I mean, the soil, at least in like around Boston, was highly acidic. Well, that's what it wants.
Yeah.
That's why your roses, your hydrangeas. We didn't do a lot of azaleas, but like even the azaleas, I'm just not a fan of azaleas in Texas. I'm not saying you can't grow them. I'm not saying they won't live, but if you've seen azaleas in Georgia, then you won't want the azaleas here. Like if you've seen those, and so I tell people it depends on where is your limit? What is your ability of what you want? If you're willing to accept this, or if you've never seen a beautiful azalea in Georgia, then you might be all right with it. But
I think you and I were talking about this before. A lot of it is that soil preparation. I mean, I think if you take the steps, I know down in Houston we talk about raised beds quite often because of the type of soils we have. So I mean, if you take the steps in order to prepare that soil correctly and get compost into it, at least a 3-inch layer. Earth kind is one of the main things we talk about. It's 3-inch layer of compost, till it in, put your plants in, drip irrigation if at all possible, and then mulching. And then, so you compost once and you mulch for life is the line that they used to say, because as that compost starts to break down, you've got that humus layer, and then that's how everything just
keeps on going.
So that's how your soils will improve. It doesn't happen overnight, but if you understand that process, and if you want to do, have a more sustainable approach.
So you really only recommend 3 inches. You think 3 inches is enough to really have so if I was to dig out a flower bed, somebody wants a flower bed renovation. I mean, we typically don't go down at least 3 inches, but sometimes we go down as much as 6.
Well, right. So what I'm saying is, put a 3-inch layer of compost, but then till it in at least 6 inches.
6 inches. There we go. Okay. All right.
Is what we're saying.
Yeah.
In areas where we've got a lot of gumbo clay soils, coming in, and they've done research with expanded shale. So putting in 3 inches of expanded shale along with the compost, that improves it even that much more. And so, if you can start off, that's where the roots are, that's where everything happens. If you can give that plant a good start from the get-go, you're going to be successful.
Why do you like the expanded shale in the beds?
It adds, it adds pore space. If you've ever seen like an electron micrograph of expanded shale, there's pores in there. So there's moisture. It can hold moisture also. And it just, over time, it does a good job. But it's pricey.
Oh, yeah.
So at minimum, do the compost.
Yeah, that's what we...
3 inches of compost is fine. But if you've got an extreme situation, you can do both. I think they've even done trials where they've just done the 3 inches of expanded shale, and they've gotten good results also.
Interesting.
So it really just depends. But they're your options. If you really want to develop that zone where that root profile is going to be, that's the first steps.
We use a lot of lava rock for the same reason, because it's porous. It's not the same as expanded shale, of course, but it just kind of breaks up that clay a little bit, and it also is porous. And so a lot of people don't understand that water can actually stay inside that, and the root plant wraps itself around that, that lava rock, and kind of, not lava rock, lava sand.
Okay. Because I was going to say that's pretty big. I was going to ask you what grade that was. I didn't know if they made it that small. It
was a lava lamp that I was actually referring to. I'm referring to a lava lamp from the 70s. No, it's lava sand.
Okay.
And that's actually that even helps and it's actually got a porosity as well.
Yeah.
That a lot of people understand, but it works good for that. So you went to Heinz, but you eventually wound up at A&M. So kind of tell me that journey of how you got there. And
so Heinz, I left Heinz in 08. They had come on some tough times. We had gone through one bankruptcy. They were going through another bankruptcy. Heinz is no longer in business. And actually, I had an opportunity to work for Syngenta Flowers. So I was with them on technical support side for about 4 years. And one of the main areas I was working on is, at the time, they owned they had a part of their business was called BioLine, which was their beneficial insects. And this production was predominantly out of England. Into the European market, it's huge. Into Canada, it's huge. And it's getting big now for growers in the U.S. Releasing beneficial insects as...
Give me some examples of that so people know what they are. I don't think people understand that.
So if I'm a grower and I'm having problems, say, with aphids, all right, in a crop, there are parasitic wasps that I can buy that are specific species that will knock out, if I know if I have peach aphid or foxglove aphid. If you're not sure of the aphid, they'll sell them as a mix. So there's Aphidius is the genus, Colmanii and Ervi.
It's not a bee; it's a wasp.
Yeah, but it's like about the size of a fungus net. So it's not
Gotcha.
It's not the wasp like what you would think.
Yeah.
And they're really pretty cool because what the female does is, these aphids are feeding. She will come upon the colony with her antenna. She sort of makes sure it's the right species because they're specific to where they'll, and she deposits an egg right inside the aphid while it's still feeding.
The parasite.
Well, it's the egg, right? And so the egg then starts to grow and becomes a larval. So the larval stage is spent inside this aphid. And so it will kill it off. It'll die off. And then we start to see what we call mummies develop. And then as it matures, it'll cut out a circular area. It'll chew it out the rear of the mummy, and then the adult will emerge. And so it's a way of, when you use beneficials, you've got to be proactive. You've got to be, especially in a greenhouse situation, growers are starting to use them in the nursery. But again, when we talk about IPM, integrated pest management, this is one of those tools in that toolbox. So it's you've got to scout, you've got to monitor, you've got to know what pests you have, you've got to understand what's happening in the greenhouse or what's happening on the nursery. Understand what's going on around the area. If you've got a farmer and he's going to come through and harvest, there's a good chance you might, all of a sudden you've got a bunch of whiteflies coming in or things like that. So if you're using beneficial insects to start with, you've got to be proactive. You can't be reactionary because there's a good chance that if the pest population is too high and then you come in and release, we talk about thresholds, and if it's too high, they're not going to catch up with it. But if you've got them there in place before that happens, then they keep everything in check.
It sounds like a crazy horror film when you think about, I'm going to sting you, I'm going to plant my child in you, and by the way, it's going to eat you to survive, and then it's going to kill you, and it's going to crawl out of your dead body. It sounds awesome.
So when I do a talk on beneficial insects and things like that, and how they use them, and talk about the pests, and there's a great there's a video that's on YouTube from one of the companies that produces them, and the photography is incredible, and so I always have that like towards the end. So you can say, well, this is what it does. It attacks this way, or it lays its egg there, but when they actually see it and then they see the new thing emerge, it's just like, oh man, it really is pretty cool. So you've got your own horror movie that is going on. And
if anyone's watched the movie Aliens, that is pretty much how
that's what it looks like. That's what the video looks like. It comes out and its head's looking around. It's got some
and it kills his host. That sounds. That's where they got the movie from. Right there. It's beneficial.
But it's really the process works, and the growers that have the people in place that are on top of it, because the product, it's a live product, so it's not something, you don't put it in the freezer when it comes in. You've got to get it out usually within 24 hours is what we used to recommend. But when you do that and you're monitoring and you're seeing what you're scouting and you're seeing what your populations are and if things are in check, you can get by all right, I don't need to do any releases. Everything's looking good. Everything's in check.
Sure.
And if for some reason, if a population does all of a sudden spike because, say, farmer crossed the way, harvested, and now you've got, you may be able to go ahead and come in with an active ingredient, a spray application. But they've done a lot of work now where you can know if I've got this, and this one falls in the green area, which is only going to knock out 25% of my beneficial population, as opposed to something that's in the red that's going to wipe everything out. So I'm going to come in with that softer chemical because I don't want to wipe out my beneficials.
Correct.
I want to keep them in place. So, using these tools, you can now
Mitigate.
It's a much better system, and more growers are using it. So
I love it.
It works. And it was interesting because when I went over to Holland to see how they do it over there, a lot of those growers are, monoculture. I just grow cut mums, or I just grow this.
Right.
We're here, when we're growing, we've got woodies, we've got annuals, and so it's more diverse, and, understanding how those environments work and how everything works. But the good growers and the people that are committed to it, they make it work for them. And it's, it really is a good program. But it's like anything else. You got to commit to it and stick with it.
Yeah.
So
I think I think that industry, if can we even call it an industry, beneficial bug industry, I think that will grow. I hope it especially grows, but I think it's going to increase. Like you said, it's already kind of more popular over in England and Canada because of their strong, harsh bans on certain products that we use here every day. They won't. And I think it really, we talked about this, before the cameras even turned on today, but I think it's really an integration of both. Like we absolutely use pest control, but I use as little as possible. I use the safest products possible. And if there's a way around it without using the harsh stuff, then that's what I want. There is a time and place for stronger stuff. Like if you've got a severe infestation of, say, German cockroaches, which are devastating and can populate incredibly fast, then you probably need to use something that you need to get rid of those. Same with rats. If you've got, if you get 100 different rats running around your walls with carrying disease, probably need to do something more aggressive. But in general, once you've got that situation under control, there are ways things you can do that you can still get, pest management done without going the harsh ways. But I think a lot of companies do use the harsh stuff because it's less callbacks from the client. Well, we always tell people, a certain amount of bugs is good. Like, people don't want to always hear that, especially if they're moving from outside of Texas to here. And I know when I moved to Texas, I don't know if this was true for you, but everyone told me when I moved to Texas how if it's, pricks you or sticks you, it lives in Texas. And there's, all the bugs and, oh, wait, you're going to hate all the bugs and you're going to hate all the snakes. And I'm like, I've barely seen, I've been here 14 years now. I've barely seen I've seen poison snakes, but not a lot. I've seen a lot of good snakes, actually. There's a lot of good snakes, like rat snakes, great snake, or bull snakes. They're aggressive, but they're actually pretty good snakes.
Right.
They're not, and neither one of those are poisonous. But same with insects. Yes, there are definitely insects here, but I think there are, I don't think we have to go in there with some high octane product that's just going to nuke the place. I just don't think that's great. I don't think it's healthy, and I don't think it's needed. It's
and I think, in looking back, I've been in the industry now for over 30 years. And so, that's the way it used to be in spraying. But the problem was, growers, a new active ingredient would come out and everybody jumped on it and they were spraying it. But then you ended up with resistant populations.
Yeah.
And so you took a good active ingredient that did a really good job, and now you build up resistance. And so you really just took that off the shelf for yourself because you can't use it now. So then, rotations and everything. So everything evolves.
Like bifenthrin, pretty tame product, but it's useful. It's wearing out. You can see it.
Yeah. And so by utilizing, that IPM mode, you're actually increasing the livelihood or the length, the usability of these AIs, because you're not spraying them as often. You're only spraying them when you need them. And the good thing is now a lot of the chemical companies, when they're developing new AIs, they're screening them now for against these beneficials because they don't want to wipe out those populations.
Right.
And so a lot of them are coming out now are in that green level.
That's what we look for
the beneficials. So that's a positive. And actually, it's a good thing because they're very specific. You know, a lot of these new AIs are specific where if you just go ahead and if you're, you know, an all organic grower, and maybe you're just using, you know, soaps and oils and stuff, you can't really pinpoint as much because it's a general. So if the beneficial gets hit with it, there's a good, you know, you're going to lose that beneficial. Where
Right.
some of these new AIs, it's not negatively going to affect the beneficial, and it's going to take care of that pest. So you know, it's more of I guess a surgical approach.
Yeah.
To it. So which is a good thing, and so you can see how the industry is changing, at least on that front.
Now, have you done any education through? I know you work for A&M AgriLife, but have you actually gone to school or had to taken classes at A&M? Or I know you work for them.
No, all my schoolwork was at in Pennsylvania at UConn.
Yeah.
You know, now it's great because the industry puts on a lot of, and especially now with webinars and stuff, you can stay up to date on the latest stuff, the new things that are coming and things like that. When I was at Syngenta, they did a really good job of getting me up to speed in that whole area. And it was really, you know, it was one of those, this looks pretty cool, but let's see how it's going to work in the U.S. And so as you start to work with the growers and bring them along and educate them, they want to do it, they just don't know how.
Sure.
And you know, so their first question was, well, is there one insect that, you know, is there one beneficial I can release that's going to take care of everything? And that's not the case, you know, especially with predatory mites. Still, maybe it'll feed on thrips, and then this species will take on whiteflies, but there's not one that's going to wipe out everything.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you know, with the various active ingredients, a lot of them now are pretty specific. There's you know, there are certain things that will wipe everything out, but then the residual is there, and you have some other issues with it. So,
have they ever figured out that mite that really wiped out the rose population in Texas here? I mean, it's
so
have they figured out anything for that yet? I mean,
well, they know what it is,
right?
You know, they know it's an area-fid mite for rose rosette. They continue to screen to find varieties that are going to be resistant. It's interesting because I was just talking with someone earlier today, and it's like, you know, is it still up here? He says, yeah. He says, but now we know not to plant, you know, large drifts of roses. And the other thing is we know now not to plant them as tightly as we did.
Air. I tell people,
Right.
I'm like, what are you going to do? I'm like, air. You've got to have some air.
You got to have airflow. It'll help with diseases. You know, anytime you got that airflow, it's going to. So I think, you know, and he's like, yeah, we hear about it every now and then, but it's not to the point as what it was before. And granted, you're probably not planting as many roses as.
No, we're not.
Right.
And I love that. I love roses. I really do. I think I mean, you can't get a lot of plants in Texas that bloom as long as they do. It's one of the best bloomers.
And it's, you know, especially when I'm talking with master gardeners and they'll say something about the knockout roses. And I just said, you know, the story behind it, I said, that was bred up in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. I said, so zone 4.
Yeah.
And I said, this thing goes east coast to west coast, north to south, and you can have flowers on it on a regular basis. You can shear it back, and it's going to, I said, that's really, you know, just from the breeding side of it. I said, that's in my lifetime, but I would have never thought you'd see a rose like that
Nuts.
Performs out well in the landscape, holds up well, especially down here.
People from Minnesota are very intelligent, I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've heard. I don't know, just a rumor, but they're very smart people.
So, but you know, so it's and you know the color line has expanded, and so you know it's a good rose, and
yeah, it is.
So was it overplanted? Probably, but
100%.
You know it's you know it happens, and so you learn from it. You don't make those same mistakes, and now see, we down in Houston, we did not see it wipe out the way it did.
Yeah.
Up here.
Have you ever been to Grapevine, Texas?
I driven through it, but yeah, I've seen pictures.
Oh, the devastation! I mean, gorgeous. I mean, the roses there were gorgeous. They really were proud of them, and it pretty much wiped them out completely. I mean,
I've seen pictures. I've heard people saying, just how many roses they had pulled out, and over at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, I've seen images of what it looked like before, and pulled everything out, and now they've got them planted, but they don't have them planted as heavily as they did, and they're not seeing any of the issues. So everything cycles through, and but eventually I'm sure they will find that the genetic side that we'll start to see that resistance. And so
either that, or I thought the first person that finds, because no sprays really took care of that mite, from my understanding. I mean, they were really struggling.
Right.
Whoever invents
because
that,
this thing is so small.
Yeah, microscopic, right?
Yeah, it's very small, that areophid mite, and it's difficult to get the coverage down in there. And they even did some work with some of the predatory mites on the beneficial side.
What's the name of the mite one more time?
Well, it's an areophid mite, and it's carried in the wind, and it's just it's a mess, But it's amazing that something that small could cause that much of damage and be that big of an issue.
Yeah.
So it's
as a landscaper, one, I like roses, period, and but two, just there's very few plants that are as pleasing to the customer because they bloom. I can get typically, you get the spring and the fall are guaranteed. So you get two really strong blooms out of them. And typically I will get a third bloom somewhere in the summer out of them too. Not as prolific, but still, you can, and they hold some color all, for about 9 months, they'll hold color. I'm not saying that they're like loaded with, but and, as a landscaper, I have my own favorite plants and, things that I like because I think they're beautiful in the landscape. And you and I think, appreciate plants for the actual structure and what it does and the durability. But most people that I plant for and that we build these beautiful landscapes for, they want color.
They want the color.
They want color.
It's always, gratification.
Yeah, they want color.
Yep.
And so it was always a go-to plant for me, just simply because I knew that it would be a pleaser. It would be I like the color that's going to be durable. Like, I'm just a big durability guy. If if it can live up here in Texas, like I said, like that graveyard story of Henry Dulberg's, probably why I love it. I love Henry Dulberg salvias. I love that plant. They just produce, and they're phenomenal. They bring in a ton of pollinators. I love that plant. So it's funny, we reference A&M all the time, and I'm right here in the backyard of TCU, and my company is Purple Care, so we have purple everywhere. And so everyone thinks that we're TCU fans, but I don't care if you're a Red Raider fan, Texas Tech, Texas fan, A&M. I don't care, or what. I don't care what's college. There's a lot of cliques or divisions in the state because they're very prideful of their alma mater, which is great. But we still reference A&M. It's kind of like the Bible when it comes to, like, I don't think anybody has done the amount of research that you guys have had. It's in your name, Texas, agriculture and mining. It's in your name, but you guys are kind of the Bible when it comes to plant life and growing. And turf care. That's what I've always been really impressed with. We reference you guys all the time, like even for aerations and people go, should I aerate my lawn? I'm like, A&M recommends you do it at least twice a year. That kind of stuff. So we use you guys not because to sell something, but just simply say, listen, we know what we're doing, but we use you guys kind of as that backstop or that reference. Like, this is what they recommend. These are the best horticultural procedures that we want to use. And so we don't want to just say, hey, this is what the last 5 guys did, because that's why people bury trees, plant trees so deeply, is because, well, that's what the last 5 landscapers have done. And they're all watching each other and they're doing the wrong thing. Like, well, that's what everyone else does. So we reference you guys constantly, and that's why I was thrilled to get you in here to speak with you, because you guys, the amount of research that you guys have done. You guys have got turf there and plants there have been there for what, 20, 30, even 40 years maybe?
Yeah, it's and that's was the whole idea behind the land grant system. Okay, so that was passed back in 1862, Abraham Lincoln. And so each state
One of my favorites.
got a land grant university. And then so that was the education side to teach about agriculture. And then several years later, there was the research side of it. And then 1912, I think it was when the Smith-Lever Act was passed. I'm pretty sure that's it, if I get everything right. And that's when the extension system was put in place, because they realized that not everybody could go to college, even for the it was predominantly rural. It was still rural. And so extension agents, the extension system was to bring that information from the university to the farmers.
Yeah.
And so the good thing is it's unbiased research. The publications are from, it's been reviewed internally. And so that information, and it's pretty much, most of it's all free,
Yeah.
And so fact sheets, things like that are all available. And now, for A&M, you go to Aggie Horticulture. There's tabs there if you're vegetables, for tree fruits and nuts and whatever. And there's fact sheets there.
Yeah.
And so that's always a good place to start. And then the other side is Aggie Turf, and there's fact sheets there for different insect control, management systems, things like that. So there's a lot of good information out there. Now, it's not somebody that's just talking on the internet because this is what I've done, and they're using something that's not even labeled,
right,
to keep, for that type of control. And so
right.
that's one of the challenges also.
That's kind of what I was trying to allude to, is that a lot of people are so, favor their college they went to. I'm like, don't worry about what college you went to. A&M is where, like you said, it's free, it's non-biased. This is information so that people can make this earth and this world a little more happier, make it say, make it more vibrant. That you actually want, whether you're, no matter where you live in Texas or what college you went to, you want people's plants to thrive, not just live, but thrive. You want their turf to thrive. You want to be able to have, a good, healthy IPM program. And so that's what you want. And it doesn't matter, so I always tell people, don't worry, don't get caught up on it.
And honestly, I refer to references from University of Florida, Georgia, LSU. I mean, any of those in that southern belt, southeast and southern belt, I'm looking at to see what it is that they've got, because conditions are going to be similar. I know growing in Texas is much different, but still, at least I know it's research based. It's not,
right.
Just somebody, I did this in my yard and this is what I think you should all be doing. So.
Yeah. What are you most proud of that you guys do over there at Texas AgriLife?
I really like, especially in my new role. So I'm a program specialist, and my focus is working with the green industry. So greenhouse growers, nursery growers, landscapers, and anything that has to do with that, and just doing. To me, it's helping the industry grow, and also helping homeowners be successful. You always hear the stories of brown thumbs and all this stuff, and I think a lot of times it's just I think a lot of people just kill them with kindness. Plants are resilient, and these freezes and these droughts that we've had.
Right.
Plants that we thought were left for dead. Next thing you know, they're coming back.
Give them some time.
And so I another one, when I'm teaching a class, I'll say, the plants don't always read what we write on the labels or what we write in the books about them. And so, it's they're resilient. So let them, stress them a little bit, now don't not water them for, 3 weeks and then think you can come back. But, you don't have to water it every day. You don't have to,
just like you and I, a little stress is actually helpful.
Right. And read the conditions, the plants are going to let you know when it's time to water and when they need it. And so it's just being able to give them the information that they need to be successful, whether it's a homeowner or it's a business. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about it.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here. I genuinely appreciate you being here. All the information you gave is fantastic. And just, going out and telling, explaining to people where they can find this information. I don't think a lot of people understand that this information's out there. I don't think that, I know that the education I got to become an expert in landscaping and lawn care in Texas, I got at A&M, and I've never attended class at A&M, but just through through going on to your agri-services and reading was amazing. So thank you so much for what you do, and thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. It was great being here. It's always fun when you get to talk about plants in the industry. So
Love it.
It's always a good day.
Yes, it is. Very good.